Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Ben.
I'm Nico, and welcome to the Tiny Bookcase. Right now, you're listening to our favourite part of the week.
Stories, discussion, and a high likelihood of gratuitous obscenities, all to sate the hunger of the bibliomancer Eusteris.
Regular listeners will know how it works, but for our newcomers, Ben and I have both written a story to the same prompt.
We're about to share those stories with each other and you for the first time, then we'll workshop them on mic. The prompt for this episode is spare. Take it away, Nico.
Spare. I never got to meet my main. By all accounts, she was brilliant. Swift, elegant, beautiful. These were words specifically chosen for the dossier, and I do my best to abide by them. I do not know if she is old now, or dead, perhaps. I do not know if she has been put to ice, or harvested till naught but scratched fibres cling to synthesized discs, ready for growth. It was not in her nature to ask these questions, and as such it is not in mine. A spare does not have all the parts of their mane, beyond the physical. Donor spares were apparently very popular when we were first being created. Instead, we have what is deemed compulsory, and that which is selected as a performance requirement. I am glad to be the kind of spare that I am. I am aware of performance spares who sold themselves piecemeal so that they could play the part the world over. Talent, past, experience, past, until their worth was diminished by an excess of access. Or I could be one of the masturbation spares. Narcissists fucking and being fucked by dozens of copies of themselves, filled only with their carnal drive. I do not know how I would cope without purpose. Even one borrowed, such as mine is. Even now, as I wait, splayed across an aperture, predatorially, I wonder who I may have been, had I all the characteristics of my main. She is agile, so too then must I be. When I drop from my hiding place, the mercenary guardian, not even worth the meagre cost they pay him, does not hear me. I know where on his back to place my knee, so that when I twist his head he cannot cry for help. The air pushes free from him, and I know he is dead, because I have done this many times. I do not feel sympathy for the dead man, nor any sense of regret for my actions. There is a part of me that feels he was a poor candidate for his role. I am gifted with my main's ability to assess those who may become a barrier to my success. This is perhaps the closest I have to her feelings. None could feel as I do always and be free. I have asked mains before questions about what it is like to feel as they do. They talk because it buys them time. Some may even believe it will buy them their life. It has not done so thus far. I know they are mains, because they scream and piss and cry. If you could make yourself again, but only the parts you needed, you would not keep cowardice, I think. So I ask them to explain to me the sensations which I cannot fathom. Indecision, empathy, hope. Their answers are seldom satisfactory. They swing between cheap platitudes they believe will assuage my requirement to kill them, and vague, hand-waving nonsense. It is irritating. My patience is short because my mains is, and that temper is a lethal tool in the arsenal I use for work. I will continue to seek further information in this instance, because I am vexed by something. As I move through hallways, illuminated by strips of pallid neon, there is nothing to distract, and so my thoughts are permitted still to roam. I have found them to roam more often when I work now, as the mundanity of my unusual career sets in. One corpse is, in all ways, the same as any other. Spare, main, male, female, infant. They are simply errant data, which must be passed in order to succeed. So my mind allows the data to ricochet harmlessly, and I wonder on the nature of nature. I understand that I am only part of my main, but in the absence of an understanding of what is missing, how can I know how much of my main I am? Perhaps she is cold and calculating, but I cannot be certain. What other side of a coin ought there be within me? Is tenderness, the ability to take an infant in one's arms and soothe them, a fundamental part of what it means to be my main? It is, my reading tells me, a fundament of womanhood, but biological imperatives have no bearing on me. Nor, in fact, do I see how this can be a keystone in the bridge of any personality. If people are defined by acts, then surely can I not be considered whole? A whole that is drenched in blood, perhaps, but even in the absence of my main's flights of fancy, have I not become rounded into what I am? Am I not better than her? Am I not, through dint of machinations beyond my ken, an optimization of a woman burdened with the weakness of human spirit? Ambition, terror, sorrow, words I understand the conceptual fundamentals of, but cannot feel, because my Maker knows they are unnecessary. I cannot age. I will not die unless they kill me. I am dedicated to my work and complete it with a fervour of expertise that cannot be matched, even by my main. For I am free of all distractions that would hold her back. I cannot hesitate. I cannot be surprised or seduced. I am better than she is capable of being. So why do I feel as though I am not a whole? Why am I aware, within the blood-filled corridors that are my veins, that I am a spare? Why can I not shake the sensation that I have less than my main? Some nameless woman, whose training I can call upon, whose body I inhabit. I have been her for as long as I have been, a fully formed body, a half-baked mind. I punch a sequence of numbers into a keypad, and a door slides open with a hiss. The acrid stink of overheated mechanical components fills the room, and I know I have found him, the target of my mission, creating and supplying illegal spares, counterfeit agents, fuckable slaves, and long-dead celebrities scraped so paper thin over tissue grown in sweltering pods. He looks up at me, the usual reaction of a man disturbed at their work by me. Shock, confusion, arousal. I know he would not have time to make a decision on what I was before I had his final breath. I see, in the kaleidoscope of my mind, 1,000 ways to brutally remove my target. Brain scattered onto walls, tongue pulled loose. But this is not what I intend. I have another chance at answers. The slender blade in my hand hums pleasingly. The vibrations are barely audible even to my perfect hearing. As its tip gently rests against the lens of his eye, I know that even a hair's breadth of movement will change his final moments. Blind is a terrible way to be tortured. Worse than seeing it coming is not. I have hurt enough people to know this. He whimpers and paws ineffectually with arms broken at all major junctures. I simply squeeze with my thighs and let the fear wash over him. The stench of urine tells me he is broken, and I have only one question, perhaps, before he is reduced to sobbing uselessness. I speak firmly and clearly, because I only have one chance. Tell me. I feel him shake with unconscious dread. The nature of the sensation of love.
Great ending. Great ending. That very much felt like you've taken my last few notes about endings.
I genuinely started writing another sentence,
Yeah.
stopped, leant back, read it again, and went, Ben would tell me to stop there.
Yeah.
So I 100% did.
Yeah, I think especially on like a character piece there where you're like constructing a mindset, it's about what she wants from the world,
Yeah.
and finding that out in that last line is a climactic moment. That's a yeah, I like that a lot. First note was assassin clones, cool. That's what I wrote down.
Yeah.
Um, I enjoyed the I want to say like lexical field of it. There was lots of stuff about like the whole like main and spare thing is very cool.
Yeah.
Then you also had like grown and harvested kind of words in there, like more natural words in there. Um, it was good. I was wondering whether or not like because you really emphasized the word fuck and fucking in there, and I
Yeah.
just like I wonder whether I guess we sort of get the inkling from about the world from her that there is a kind of like I don't know like they are that kind of thing is quite commonplace, to have like a fuck
Yeah.
slave or whatever that's a clone, a spare. So like, would they put that much emphasis on it? Um,
I so with the characterization, it was an interesting one with the swearing. So it's the only swearing she does,
yeah, I
and
think that's why it
my
stood out.
thought was that that she'd sort of asked about it because she's got no biological imperative. Said, "What
Yeah,
is this?" "Oh, it's fucking." Said, fucking, okay, and just that's all she knows it as is that
mm,
kind of guttural. This is how someone explained it to her, but it's I've kind of fell in love with the character concept as I was writing it. It's one where I know we've talked about it before, but you think actually I could write more of this sort of a character. Maybe it's a concept to pick up and put in something else, not exactly this person per
maybe
se, but
I like it. I mean,
so,
by that do you mean these kind of like more kind of violent killer mentalities?
yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
also the main and spare thing. 'Cause it started as a there's quite a lot of stories about people who they have another kid so they can harvest their organs for a sick child. But the thought of people being able to, well, if I can have a clone of myself that's at my genetic optimum, I could just have its lungs, liver, whatever, and it wouldn't matter.
so that
And
is the
then,
concept from Never Let Me Go,
oh,
which is a Katsuo Ishiguro joint novel, which they made
oh,
into a movie as well. But this,
okay,
sorry for anybody that hasn't seen that movie, but that is the spoiler for it.
okay,
But yeah, this idea of like people being reared as spares for organ donation and stuff is that
cool.
story. So it was really cool that you kind of like alluded to that and then moved past it rather than it being like that's the whole thing.
Yeah,
Um,
it's oh,
yeah,
so that's what it rooted as, and I thought, well, imagine if there was someone who was like a great they'd acted as an assassin for a government, and then that government said, "Oh, hang on, we can have
yeah.
while they're in their physical peak, 400 of them. It will cost us them, but we'll just have a bunch of them that are great at killing, and we'll just send them out. And if they die, it doesn't matter. We'll just send another one."
It's
Thought,
really
well,
interesting. Had you encountered Never Let Me Go before you had that concept, or is it
no,
sort of yeah? Okay, that is really cool then.
have I
So
accidentally written instead of matching you in this instance, I've matched another person.
Katsuo, well, I think if you could go around matching Katsuo Ishiguro loads, then I think you'd be winning awards, my friend. So keep going.
I'll
Um,
try. I'll try.
um, so you sort of smashed Never Let Me Go into Metal Gear Solid with the idea of having like
Yeah,
assassin clones and stuff. I think it's really cool. I like it. It's it's always interesting to see where these kind of things come from, and like if you'd have stopped there, that wouldn't have been enough. If it
yeah,
was just conceptual, it wouldn't have been enough. But you were painting this picture of this fairly nascent consciousness trying to understand the world around them, trying to understand the mind that it had been copied from. Like you got the depth from it. I also thought you did very well to sort of encapsulate that mundanity that you mentioned, the mundanity of her career. You said at one point
yeah,
that gave me strong vibes of the recent David Fincher movie, The Killer, with Michael Fassbender. This idea of an assassin that everything needs to be just so, and he needs to sort of dehumanize everything in order to be able to act at a split second notice.
Yeah.
And it all draws from this idea of like what modern militaries do to people in order to turn them into killing machines, isn't it? Which is to break them and dehumanize them so that they can actually pull a trigger.
Yeah. Oh God, it's. We could start talking about the military-industrial complex. It's.
Well, I think you
It
have.
is.
I think you've
Yeah.
already you've incorporated that into a science fiction concept. I like it a lot. I like it a lot. That they talk because it buys them time was the first truly chilling line for me in that.
Yeah.
It's all very chilling because especially because of your delivery, but they talk because it buys them time. That was sort of the first time I felt that she showed an awareness of what other people were thinking. Like she actually understood what other people were
Yeah.
thinking. And that was scary. That was scary. I This isn't a thing about the story, but maybe even the performance. And I really hesitate to give you notes about your performance because you do so well, and I did really enjoy that. But would it have been even creepier if they had a normal voice? But you put a bit in about them being aware that they were aping that person's voice. You know, like how you said, my main is agile, so I must be too. It could be
Yeah.
like my main is softly spoken, so I am too. Or that kind of like almost like doll-like creepiness to it. I don't know.
Oh,
It's
that's no.
it's a
Yeah, that
thought.
could. So my first thought was for her to have a sort of soft Russian accent,
Mm-hmm.
but to have the voice of the doctor that had sort of pulled her out of the tank and taught her,
How speaks.
or sort of given her missions, because it's the only voice she's ever really hearing, because they're made fully grown, so they don't have a parentage. But yeah, I think that's a cool concept to have a voice that you don't really know. You don't know where your accents come from. You don't know,
Mm.
like, oh, my voice is a little bit raspy and I don't know why. Or oh yeah, that is creepy. I like that.
I also liked the line you would not keep cowardice. I think
Yeah,
because that really shows this person's lack of humanity. I think because if you can feel fear, then you know that fear is actually very useful and very human.
yeah,
Um, whereas she's sort of summing up all fear as cowardice because
yeah,
it's a response to them about to die, isn't it? I think it's probably we would say perfectly natural to have a fear response when somebody's about to murder you.
yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
so that I thought that was really interesting. I really enjoyed it. I think as I say, like I think there was a lot of depth there achieved quite simply, which is how we should all be trying to do it. I think, and a
Thank
good
you.
idea. Yeah, yeah, core concept's
I'm
good.
I'm glad. And I'm glad that my ability to take in notes has not diminished. So thank you, because it did genuinely help that story. I have struggled a few times recently. I think you'd agree with finding that close, and you're repeatedly hitting me with the finish it properly. Learn where to put your cut. Was it's good feedback that's helped me write a better
Well,
story this time.
you know, I would say, and to anybody listening as well, like you need to find that for yourself to a certain degree. Like
Yeah,
it may be the case that that's more like my style, and I don't want to be just shoving my style on you because you have your own approach to things. But it is just worth. Yeah, I'm glad that you're sort of thinking about it like that because I think you do often write these absolute banger lines like towards the end. So yeah, it's there.
and then
It's
tail off a
yeah.
little bit. Yeah.
Maybe, or maybe there is. Maybe you're doing that because there is something else to come. Maybe you're a bit hampered by the word limit. Maybe, um, it's sometimes maybe you needed another 500 and you're already at the thing.
Yeah.
It's difficult to say, and none of this is a like a negatively framed criticism. This is all
Oh no, of course.
very constructive and positive because fundamentally these stories are great. And it's just about workshopping them, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
Yep.
it's
Yeah, go on.
it's a good skill to have as well. I'd say for anyone who's writing, like it can be really frightening. And I know we've said it before, but it can be really frightening to give someone your work because it is difficult to get feedback. But if you can get past that barrier and start kind of enjoying that breakdown process and letting other people like put their hands into your work and say, "Have you tried this?" and thought about it, it actually becomes extremely rewarding. to have
Yeah.
someone help you find what you might be missing. Or we got taught it when I was writing some music with the band once. Someone said, "Oh, you've got demo love," which is, you write the song the first time and you all agree, yeah, this is brilliant, but you
Ah,
need to play it to someone else so they can go, well, okay, well, it doesn't need two choruses. You can take that bit out. I'd
mm-hmm.
probably cut that verse in half. And your instinct will be to say, well, they don't know anything. It's perfect. We wrote a brilliant song, but it's demo love. And I think it's just as possible in stories that you can
Yeah.
kind of feel like, oh, it's my story. I wrote it, but none. If you think about your favorite author, they didn't sit down, write a book, and then it printed itself and put it on the shelves. There are so many people involved in helping people achieve their maximum potential. I think
Absolutely.
it's a great skill to become
The only
comfortable
other
with.
very slight warning, though, I just add to that, like a little addendum, is that it is possible to be given feedback that is not, shall we say, inclusive of what you've tried to do with the story. So
Yeah,
it can be a bit of a pitfall for giving feedback to be like, no, 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 that's not how you do it. Just tear it all down and restart it, and this is how you do it. And when someone's totally rewriting your story in giving you feedback, I feel like that's not feedback, and I feel like that's not constructive, because the idea is to build on the foundations that you've already got. So I've received feedback in the past that has been somebody else has just said none of that, same concept, tweaked a little bit, and then do it in my style. So that's why I was keen to say, don't, we need to make sure you're doing it with your style of endings as well, because
not all feedback is born equally.
yeah, basically, it's just, I think it's in the spirit that it's given. I think it's
Yeah,
important because if you're trying to help somebody improve their piece, that's great. That's what you should be doing. If
yeah,
you're
it's their
trying to make
piece.
that
Yeah,
piece better for your own self-aggrandizement, then that's not a good place to be giving feedback from. So yeah, well, I don't think we've ever done that, or I hope we've never done that on here. It's just it does exist in the world. So any other writers out there that have encountered that, just be aware that it can happen.
I do feel like I'm now waiting for that. That being said, I think it would be better if she was a horse. But
I think I probably have verged on it a couple of times with you, especially when I'm in a very logical brain space. But it's important to it's about the pursuit of it, isn't it? It's about trying to give good feedback because in the same way of you can get better at writing and telling stories, you can also get better at giving feedback.
yeah,
So
no,
that's
I
important
fully
too.
agree, and it's why the writers' room concept works.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes I am very good at concepts. I will say, what if this thing was a thing? But I'm not always brilliant at getting it onto paper and sort of making it sound how it sounded in my head. And I think that's a thing you've always been good for with me in saying, that's good, but what about that's good, but what about is one of the most powerful questions. Turn everything into an improv class.
Yeah, go full yes and.
Yes and yes and.
You know,
It's
I encountered a
lovely.
good. I encountered another thing in that regard the other day, which I think you probably already are aware of because you've been sort of trained as an actor. But it was an improv thing where rather than just at yes anding, which they were doing, they had somebody else there shouting different choice
Yes,
after
yeah, yeah,
after you've done it, and then the person that's just yes anded has to yes and again with a different choice.
yeah.
I really liked that. I thought that was really cool. I think, yeah,
It can become extremely manic, that sort of
I
improv,
bet
but
it
it's good
can,
fun.
but it probably is also really good for breaking through things like writer's block because you can just start punching in every direction.
It's also brilliant for people. You end up with what you'd call like an improv language.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I fall back on if I need to suddenly think of someone? Do I always say my mother? Well, if they always say my mother and you can say someone else, then all of a sudden they have to actually improvise again instead of just
Okay, all
using
right.
their toolkit, and it's
So it's
brilliant for that.
so it's sort of like cutting away people's safety nets, so they actually have to go.
Have to improvise again, yeah, especially with seasoned improvisers.
Oh, fascinating. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside, but I just thought I'd bring it up. It was vaguely
Yes.
relevant.
So, because we went, you were very wise, and then we got deep on editing, and then we got talking about improv. So,
Yeah.
I'm going to put us back on track and ask if you'd be kind enough to share a story with me,
Yes.
if you've got one going.
I don't know.
Spare?
I might have one spare. Spare. The bumper-to-bumper cars had popped like napalm-filled balloons. Terry remembered wondering whether Cortez had been filled with the same mix of fear and excitement when he scuttled his fleet. There would be no going back. To his ears, each fuel tank bang had been a tick on London's sprawling clock face, counting down to the birth of a new world. No more M25, no more debt, no more capitalism. He remembered chanting, "Anything you can buy costs too much." He'd even burned his tie. The spunk he'd had back then made Terry wince these days. The Exodus, they'd called it, as even atheists need biblical proportionality sometimes. After hundreds of years spent giving modernity a go, with all of its exploitation and empty promises, humanity had convinced itself to leave the cities and return to nature. Communes, kibbutz, hamlets, whatever you want to call it, had sprung up on land reclaimed from agribarons, corporations, and the irrelevant aristocracy. People had died, that was true, but those who survived reasoned that at least it was in service of a different kind of future, one which they had chosen for themselves. Terry had been no different. The new world had been good for him, initially, pitching in, growing food, and adapting to life without access to the internet in his pocket. All of it gave him worth beyond money. The difficulties they all endured sharpened his need for it to work. Eventually, it had. The community he was a part of in Epping Forest thrived as he welcomed every new life the couples around him made. Most people had spent themselves to zero, learning skills and buying everything they would need once they were off grid. Others had zeroed themselves reenacting the last days of Rome. Some few had rejected the Exodus entirely and instead bought up what remained of the dead economy. Terry had been a prepper, and the small home he built for himself was nestled in a copse of hornbeams. It had taken several years to finish, and each autumn the mossy thatched roof was gilded with fallen leaves, until it seemed as much a part of the forest as he'd hoped for. The twinned windows either side of his Hobbit-inspired front door glowed invitingly whenever he lit the stove. Despite all that, Terry felt an emptiness growing inside him. He looked at the families near him and couldn't spot the same void in them. The only difference between them and him, he reasoned, was someone to share the new world with. Until he had that, he was surplus to whatever future they were all building. Esmeralda. Terry smiled as he said the name to himself. He hated that he regularly conversed with a mirror, but felt happy that today would be the last time. The trek out to Junction 27 from his home was short, but importantly required secrecy. He had worn the path through the forest smooth after years of spiriting himself away in the early hours of the morning, leaving his neighbours none the wiser. A burnt husk of a VW camper with stretched tarp replacing its shattered windows served as his hidey hole. Terry opened it up and pulled his bicycle out. His suit came next, and then finally he retrieved his wallet from under the wheel arch. Terry relocked the camper, and then arrowed down the M11 into what had been the bustling centre of London. Beggars and burnouts occupied most districts. Calls for spare change were echoes to the hiss of his tyres, on streets paved by a dissolved empire. The big fence, as it was unimaginatively known, stretched across the front of the boundary line of Canary Wharf's dilapidated skyscrapers. It was a double-chain link monstrosity which amputated the rest of the city from the tenacious financial district. That last bastion of greed jutted out into the Thames and pulsed with activity, as though it were a purpling appendix preparing to burst. Terry flashed his wallet and broker's license to the guard, who pulled a small gate aside to let him in. He left his fear that he would be outed as a scab by people he knew behind him, and instead put his game face on, as beyond the fence, all was bartering and chaos. Terry wove through the open-air stock markets, which crowded around satellite-connected Wi-Fi hubs. He had grown to know them well, but it was knowledge which he guarded with his life from those in the New World. Today, Terry knew he had no need of them. He had already accumulated all of the money he would need. The docks, though in disrepair, were choked with hustlers, thieves, and sailors. As he passed, he was peddled sex and food in a dozen different languages, all of which vied for his attention, as his ears had grown used to the English spoken in Epping. Terry pushed his bike past all the distractions the old world had left to offer and continued towards a repurposed fishing warehouse, which bore a large neon sign bolted to its face like a bad tattoo. It glowed impotently in the grey daylight, but he knew that at night the two nuzzling penguins were glacier blue, and the heart they stood inside was hot pink. The words, "Mate for Life," were spray painted above the entrance. Inside, the lobby held a single metal desk and several office chairs with their wheels snapped off in what passed for a waiting area. The man behind the desk wore a set of pink-accented blue scrubs. He looked up from his dirty mag to frown at Terry as he wheeled his bike up to the desk. Terry felt his excitement rising and smiled too broadly at the man. "Hi, I'm here to complete payment and pick up my mate." "Order ID." 4892, Esmeralda. 4829? No, 92. I have the paperwork here. The man nodded and counted the pile of aging banknotes Terry lay on the desk. "Take a seat. I'll get you when we unload it." The man stood and left him. The cushioning on the office chairs had been flattened into hardness by decades of backsides, but Terry did as he was told. He passed the time by peering at the posters which filled the walls of the lobby. Each bore an airbrushed and heavily stereotyped woman. The slogans boasted that they were all tested for venereal disease and fertility before being placed on the roster. His mind's eye wandered to the pictures he'd seen of Esmeralda. He smiled again, feeling something approaching happiness for the first time in years. When the man returned, he waved at Terry to follow him through some PVC strip curtains. The cracked epoxy floor of the industrial area beyond was stained by the boot prints of labourers. The vast warehouse had several large shipping containers on it already, and Terry watched a dock crane swing another one off a ship which harboured beyond the loading bay. He scanned the dock, looking for passengers disembarking. "Do they get off over there?" Terry asked, pointing to the side of the ship. The man shook his head and pointed at the container descending from the crane towards him. It took Terry a moment to realise what the man meant, but when he did, the happy excitement he'd felt fell away from him. Shame, colder than winter, replaced it. "Don't worry," said the man. "They are given supplies for journey in Roma. This way, we know they are unspoiled for you." Terry couldn't muster a response, but instead waited dumbly as the lock was taken off the container. Two workmen pulled open the door to reveal the darkness within and a revolting smell. He saw one of the workers shake his head before flicking on a torch to peer inside. Terry glimpsed the crooked angle of slack limbs before looking away. "Ah, no good," said the man. "We ordered you another one." "No!" snapped Terry. "No, don't do that. I had no idea you would... Just no." "There is no money back." The man looked confused. "Keep it." The door of the VW camper was open when he returned. The discarded padlock was lying in a puddle by the door. He saw it was bent where it had been forced. The attempted theft didn't bother Terry, who doggedly changed out of his sweat-soaked suit and threw it inside with his bike. He'd tossed his wallet to the beggars he'd cycled past, not knowing if it was a blessing or a curse what he was giving to them. The path back home was dark, and Terry let his feet's memory guide him. He had not expected to be coming home alone, and he wondered what she would have made of following a strange man into a shadowy forest. Terry kicked at wet leaves and wondered whether he'd ever feel anything again. The acrid smell of damp ash made him look up as he approached his home. The roof was gone, caved in by a fire which still sent tendrils of smoke through his smashed windows. The door was splintered around where the lock had been, and the words "fucking scab" had been sprayed over the glossy red finish. His belongings were scattered about the copse. His mirror had broken into 3 pieces where it had been thrown on the ground. Terry felt tears gathering in his eyes as he nodded at his reflection before, speaking softly, he said the words he'd once chanted. "Anything you can buy costs too much."
Well, there you go, proving that you were right to give the advice. What a great final line. The my first note is there's something ominous about anything you can buy costs too much. That is the first note. So for it to then close on that,
Yeah,
bravo, really, really nice.
thank you.
Um, Great concept. For it to feel like it's going one way and it's going to tell the story of sort of building that community, and then to jump to the like loneliness and dissatisfaction that he's given himself. I mean, it's
Yeah,
such a. I wrote down it's loneliness, dissatisfaction is a brutal killer. Like it's such a tough human thing, isn't it? That idea that he can't quite fathom that it's him that's the problem when nothing is making him happy. But yeah,
yeah.
this
I think the idea of uh, this just quite it's quite a male story. I think that doesn't mean that
yeah
that I don't think it would it would be guessable for anybody else, but it's more the fact that I sort of wrote this from the point of view of knowing some men who are trying really hard to be a part of society, and
yeah
they want to be happy, and they want to be coupled up, and it's just not working for them for whatever reason. But I thought, wouldn't that be interesting in when you've gone through a complete seismic world shift? Because in many ways, I feel like we need one of those in modern society anyway.
yeah I'd agree.
I feel like there's a lot of extremely fucked up shit that just keeps happening because of the way that things are set up. Um, so I wanted to imagine this idea of it being like a almost a utopia. A lot of people have gone for this utopia, but even inside this utopia, there's something missing for this person, and he's had to go through all this to just realize that he's just fucking lonely. And
Yeah,
then after he's closed himself off in like an isolated community that no longer has access to the internet, and he can't meet anybody because they're all just family members of the people around him. And do you know what I mean? Like he's completely locked away, so he has to
painted himself
re-engage.
into a corner.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So he has to re-engage with the society, what's left of the society that he helped to destroy, in order to try and find a mate. Um, so that was sort of where it came from. But
yeah,
I also think that I maybe also did some quite good sort of criticisms of that Exodus outlook as well.
yes,
The fact that like he only hears other languages when he goes into the city.
yeah. I think that hit particularly hard for me. I spent a lot of my youth in Epping Forest
Right.
because my nan's house backed onto it.
That's
So
weird.
when
My dad lives near there, so maybe we weren't
oh
a
fun,
million
yeah.
miles away. Yeah.
When my mum would go to work, she'd leave me with my nan, and I'd go and hang out in Epping Forest. So the idea, yeah, I had a really clear image of what it looked like in the mid 90s,
Mm.
but with all these sort of homes built into it, it was very real for me. And then when you said, he only hears English there, I thought, yeah, that's exactly how it would be. Like Epping, that is what you'd have. That's what would be left. Like from there to the coast, it would be nothing but pink faces. And there was this kind of you're talking about this like, new world, and you said streets paved by a dissolved empire, and it made me think of that that the streets paved with gold symbolism,
Yeah.
and really called that up really nicely, and just put me in this. Yeah, even the bit that is civilized in inverted commas is actually just that's dead now. You killed it, and there's nothing coming back to returning to the scene of your crime.
Yeah. It's just a corpse. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
just a sprawling
it's.
corpse that humanity doesn't have a use for anymore.
I was also the mate for life. Him
Mm.
saying, "Oh, I'm here to pick up my mate." So uncomfortable.
Yes.
The terminology brilliantly evocative of that kind of. Actually, if you want to talk to females, that kind of
Exactly. Yeah.
mindset.
Yeah. No, it had a bit
Oh,
of an incel vibe to it, didn't it? Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
just these women being traded like meat. Just absolutely. I wrote down all in capitals. Oh, now he's ashamed. When you were talking about the
I
shipping
know.
container coming off the
Yeah.
boat, it's like I hate this guy, and it's really interesting to be in a short story to go on the journey of like, yeah, good for you, man, standing up for what you believe in, to in quite a short space of time being like, you got what you deserved.
Mm.
You
But
did this to you.
I mean, how often though? if you ever dig into anything that you enjoy in our sort of capitalist society, invariably, eventually, you will find something that you really won't agree with in terms of
Yeah.
how
Oh
it's
yeah.
how it's produced or marketed or whatever it is. How many things have palm oil in them now, and then you read about how they're just literally ripping down rainforests in order to put a
Yeah.
monoculture in. Like, it's just, so he's clearly not cared enough to look into where
To
where
actually,
these mates are sourced.
yeah.
He's or how they're
It
going to
it
travel, or yeah, it's
it was a solution to his problem, and that was
yeah,
enough.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Which is a very real thing, and it is indicative, I think, really, of what now is. There's this whole belief, isn't there, that the only way you could actually live ethically now is to die. Like
yeah.
that
Well,
it's impossible to be a functional part of the society that is constructed around us
I think that's a
and
slippery
live.
road though, because theoretically, if the most ethical thing you can do is die, then you're actually talking like suicide bomber territory, aren't you? Because theoretically, the more people you take with you, the more ethical it is somehow, which is completely fucking
Oh,
backwards.
now you say it, Ben.
No, I've not just radicalized you on this podcast. On
This is going to
episode,
be played in court.
I'm gonna go down for this.
You're gonna you're gonna be at the BFS in handcuffs, my friend. They said I can come for an hour.
The terms of my house
Yeah,
arrest.
it is a really interesting one because do you know I know you and I have both seen him. There's a guy who's quite popular on social media now who goes bogging and he sees nice things provided. That guy.
Oh, he's
And
so
there's
odd. He's so odd.
yeah,
Yes, yeah, I
he
do know
says
him.
shabba dabba doo quite a lot.
Oh,
Like
I
I
find him
imagine
extremely disquieting whenever because he just rambles at you, and
yeah,
it
he's a
it
rambling rambler.
well, that's the thing, but it gives you that vibe of like when you encounter somebody that's probably a bit unstable on like public transport or something, and they just start shouting at people in
Yeah,
public.
100%.
That's what that guy gives me, like the same kind of like, oh, I feel like the need to avert my eyes sort of thing.
Well, it's he Terry, your character reminded me of him in a way.
That's funny.
Like this kind of just, oh yeah, it'll all be fine if I live in the woods. Yeah, all right, mate. That's it's really
Yeah.
easy to say things like that, isn't it? Like, oh, sometimes I wish I could just pack up and move to Alaska. You can, but you're smart enough not to.
Oh, yes. No, I had a good time writing that story. It feels potentially like a touch crammed, maybe a bit overwritten. I don't really know how to slow that one down.
It's an interesting one because it needs the setup. It then needs to establish the new order. You then need to show that he's been doing this multiple times. So you need the camper van. You need the situation in the city, and then you need the payoff. So there's nothing you can sort of take out.
No, no.
Like all of the parts are required. You couldn't be like, oh, just don't have him go to the camper van. What? So he just teleports to the city. That it doesn't. No, you
Yeah.
need to show that he's got his little lockup, and so I think it's like either trimming something, but I mean, what? I
I mean,
don't think in the word count
well, that's the thing. It's already
you could
100
do
over.
much more. Yeah,
Like I have broken the rules. This is 100 over. So I think it potentially needs more words rather than fewer, I think. But
yeah.
yes, interesting. Ah, I keep coming back to like car imagery as well. Like there's lots of like cars and motorway imagery. I think it's
Oh
because I
yeah.
recently moved next to a fucking motorway, so it probably is just going into my brain at night like some
Just
sort of rot.
it's because you imagine them all bursting like you had at the start of the story. Like, yeah, fuck you, blow up cars. I see this radicalization again.
And also, I can't write a story without some sort of historical reference, so I had to slam Cortez in there somewhere as well.
I did catch it. I wasn't going to bring it up, Ben. I was going to let you just let you slide one under the radar.
No,
Oh no,
I
really.
need historical analogy, my friend.
A historical analogy you will have as
No,
soon as we
no.
finish recording.
Well,
To Greece we go.
I don't need telling twice. That's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening, guys.
Ta-ra. To Greece.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La, How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?